that, and I definitely noted the that sort of that feeling that careers should just be there's a ladder and you just go from rung to rung and it's really sort of steady progression. And I saw so many talented women who, needed to take a step back or off the ladder for anything from 2 to 5 to 7 years because of life and family and caring responsibilities. And then the company just not remembering that they were brilliant before and they're still brilliant, but they just don't want it right now, but they'll want it again later and just forgetting about them. And it's a huge pool of talent either left the industry or never reached its potential, I think. So that's also one of the things I think we can we have got a bit better at, but we've got lots more to do.
I agree, but that's sector wide, isn't it? And I think with the coalition's work, we've made a good start, and we all appreciate that it takes time to achieve. It's not an overnight fix. This is a long journey, quite rightly. So how does, in thinking about all the things that Shell's been doing on this to make changes inside the organisation, and also think about the external pipeline, what are the things that you're most pleased about? When you think about the progress that's been made, what do you put that down to?
Yeah, and again, I mean, we discuss this a lot, don't we, with the CEOs and the ELC and yourself. And there really isn't one thing. This has been a focus for, oh gosh, decades. Yeah, it's been decades in the making. But if I go back to 2005 in Shell, 12% of our senior leaders, that's not that long ago really, 12% of our senior leaders in the UK were female, and now it's 30. So a number of things came into play there. I think we focused on it, we measured it and we managed it. It's a company with a lot of engineers and scientists. We tend to manage what we measure. I think, all the levers you pull around mentoring circles and support and, really looking at female development programs where that's what people need, sponsorship have helped. I think we also have put a lot of effort over the last decade, probably, I think, into the more flexible working environment and trying to embed that more, trying to see that you can work differently, not just in terms of, because the classic thing is, okay, flexible working means you've got a mum and she works 3 or 4 days a week. That's the sort of kind of box of flexible working, right?
Yeah. We'll be put in that box.
Been in that box quite a while. But actually, it's about where you work and when you start, when you finish, and it's about a flexibility which is much deeper than that. And I think one of the things that we did a few years ago was we had TimeWise come in and do an audit of our flexible working, all of it, the policies, the processes, and then they interviewed loads of people. So the sort of reality on the ground versus lovely shiny policies. And we found that, and this is why we asked them to come in, we suspected as much, a real inconsistency in who understood the policy, how it was implemented, how various line managers felt they were empowered to say yes or no. So we did a very large overhaul of the policy, simplified it, kind of put in the sort of very strong guidance to line managers. These are the things that if somebody asks, you just say yes. These are the things that somebody asks, you should say yes, but here are the things to think about, in the context of that particular role, because there is, differentiation. And here are the things that are a bit more tricky. So, this is where you should really go and talk to HR, and these are the things to consider. And just to give people more help. And then we try to really drive that implementation more consistently. And that helped. That's a sort of a culture change, right? And at the same time, we were changing our whole how we work in the office, wanting it to be more, more flexible, more agile, more collaborative in the way the space is set up. So it all kind of came together quite nicely. And I think that's been a positive. But you know what? We've made progress on that, but nothing like the progress we will have made post-COVID.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, well, if it wasn't working before March, it should be working by now.
The areas where it was working are sitting, that's fine. They've learned a little, but actually it was working already. But there's a lot of areas where there was still a big question mark about whether we could do this differently. And oh my gosh, we've learned a lot there. And
so I guess, for example, like the trading operation, they've been always going, well, no, we just can't, that has to be done under sort of regulated conditions in a certain space, in a certain way.
Absolutely, and the traders have done an amazing job. I mean, there are some infrastructure challenges and bandwidth issues, and the regulator had to sort of ease off on some of the regulations. But yes, we have very successfully managed that, and it does make you think, okay, so there's some of this that you're always going to want to do in an office, but there is more flexibility in a lot of these activities than we ever would have known without this experience. You know, with all the negatives it's brought to, God, so many people in the economy and jobs, it has also taught us some things. And the other thing I'm quite proud of, I think, in Shell is our return to work program, which we piloted a few years ago, and that was very much targeting. Actually, do you know where I got really passionate about it? It was a round table, a dinner with Claire Perry when she was the energy minister, and there was a group of women. It was women all talking about how we can improve diversity in the oil and gas sector, and Claire talked about the fact that she basically did a return to work program, that she'd taken a number of years off after she had her daughters, I think, and she'd been out of work for quite a while, and it had been a real struggle to get back, and it was actually a return to work program with the bank or something that got her back in. And I just thought, wow, you're the energy minister, this is incredible. And you know, we had a couple of other ladies around the table that had also very big senior jobs now, and had also benefited from it. And I thought, this is madness. Why are we not tapping into talent? And so, you know, we ran a pilot. It was successful beyond our wildest dreams in terms of the caliber of people. I think it was all women the first year, and then there was we had mainly women, but also one male participant the second year. And you know, it was only meant to be a 6-month kind of comeback, skills development, CV support, confidence building, mentorship. But you know, about 2/3 of the people who've come through over the last few cohorts are still with us, because people are like, I don't want to lose her. She's amazing. And you know,
Yeah.
one of the ladies, Susan Ferry, is in my energy transition team, and she had 7 years off, I think. You know, and of course, we did not want to lose her when her 6 months were up. And you know, she's a hugely important member of the energy transition team in Shell UK. And so, but I think otherwise we would never have found some of this talent. So this idea of thinking about recruitment for graduates, absolutely. Thinking about experienced hires and you know, maximizing your diversity there in all dimensions, absolutely. And then there's this other pool, I think, is pipeline from people who've stepped away, but maybe would quite like to step back, but don't know how. We got such a strong response to the in terms of applications, and we were literally spoiled for choice. So
Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah,
really, really positive, and also so life-changing for them too, and what probably felt like there were lots of obstacles in the way, and a difficult journey actually. So to have that opportunity, really, really, really great. So
yeah.
what advice would you give to a CEO that hasn't embarked on this journey yet of inclusivity and improving their talent pool?
Ooh, it's always hard to imagine what advice you should be, you know, you never feel quite qualified to give advice to any CEO. But there are maybe a couple of things from what I've learned in my time in this role, and also I guess my roles before. And I guess, oh gosh, you know, one thing is that I think you have to be prepared to really shine a light on your company, on how diverse and inclusive it really is, and how you are really embracing D&I. You know, do people really feel included and cared for, and that diversity is embraced? Because you can put in a lot of structure and process and programs, and not necessarily move the dial. Yeah, so programs only matter if they're driving outcomes, like really tangible outcomes. So that means you have to measure. You have to have a baseline, and you have to have ideally ambitions or aspirations or targets, and you have to think about leadership and culture. Yeah, ask hard questions, be prepared to accept uncomfortable answers, I think. And that, you know, that I think if you're open in that way, your organization will respond to you. I also think you have to hold your leaders to account, because one thing that I certainly found very much when I worked for Helga was that he was so crystal clear on, you know, what mattered. You know, so I sat in the EC, so I had you know, obviously very sort of regular access to my CEO, and he was very clear on what mattered to him. And what mattered to him mattered to the EC, and it mattered to their leaders, and it drove change in the organization. And I see the same sort of thing with Ben, and I think that sort of leadership, you know, being so very, very clear about what matters, and where you want yourself and them to stand up and be counted. People really respond to that, and I think that's what sort of shifts culture as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think also certainly in working with you and the other CEOs, and then connecting in with your colleagues in your sort of diversity, inclusion, HR, people teams, that if you haven't got that connection of the leader shining a light on, it doesn't give those people teams the airtime and the visibility that they need, do they? So they similarly, I think, can feel a bit frustrated, or they're up against it trying to introduce lots of things, but it's not got the kind of traction that it necessarily needs to have to be successful.
No, I think that's right. And I think we see that in all the time, don't we, in the ELC group? You know, if you look at what EDF presented to us on supply chain, diversity in supply chain, and how much that matters, and just how they've driven that. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
super impressive, right? And likewise, you know, whether it's Keith or Alistair, there's just so much happening in those organizations. And you see the power of sort of leadership commitment, which is the great thing about the ELC, right? Because we all get to learn from each other, because, you know,
Yeah.
some of us are doing quite well in some areas, but really haven't, you know, moved the dial in others at all. And others have moved the dial hugely there, but are struggling with something else. And that sort of ability at a CEO level to take the amount of time that the CEOs take to,
Yep.
you know, every couple of months to come together, you know, with yourself and really test ourselves on what we're doing well and where we're not succeeding yet, and being humble enough to learn from each other and put our hands up and say, well, this we're kind of doing well, but you know, this, oof, it's been brilliant, really
Yeah, and
inspiring.
that's the piece I really like, actually, is the, oh crikey, we just can't crack this one, can anybody help? We've really struggled with such and such, can anybody help? And the sharing and the trust in that is I think a hugely positive thing that I just don't see in any of the other forums that I'm involved with. So it makes that group a real pleasure to spend time with, actually.
Yeah, it's a very honest group, right?
Yeah.
And I think, do you remember the first or second meeting, John Pettigrew from National Grid said, let's just start with, what do we all think the barriers are? Let's
Yeah.
just start there. And that one question, I think, sort of really set us up for the first year, didn't it?
It did. It did. And I think it also connected the CEO's personal commitment to this into the organisational commitment and understanding what that was, where everybody was, and what there was to do. And it was really powerful, I think, actually.
Yeah, it was. It took it from, this is a sort of academically important and interesting, to know, okay, we've got to get under the hood here.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so they're massively engaging sessions, right? I do
Yeah.
feel like we're learning. I feel like we're properly learning from each other now.
Yeah, I think so. Do you think that so, I mean, that's all of us among sort of companies, key companies in the energy sector. Do you think there's a role for governments and regulators in this conversation too, in terms of pushing companies and others to make good progress?
Oh yeah, no, I do completely. And in fact, in some ways, I think it's almost exactly the same words I used previously. What matters to governments and regulators tends to matter to us at
Yeah.
a leadership level in an organization. So I mean, I see this in different roles that I have. Like, you know, I chair the Shell Pension Fund, and we talk to fund managers a lot, and we talk a lot about their D&I plans and strategies, and we quiz them on these things, and we quiz them on ESG, and what matters to us as asset owners matters to them as fund managers. And it's exactly, this is the model we need to move to, I think, where no matter what conversation you're in with a regulator or a government, or, you know, a fund manager or a asset owner, there's a lot of things that matter to us these days. It's that whole stakeholder capitalism rather than purely shareholder capitalism. I sense that the more we all kind of come together on these common goals and common sort of values, the more likely we are to drive progress.
Yeah. So as a final thought, then, what advice would you give to a woman who's looking to aspire and excel and do as well as you've done? What would you say?
Oh, yeah. So I always give sort of a version of the same answer to this one, because I think it's the one thing that made the difference to a girl, I suppose, who had no interest in management at all. I wanted to be technical forever. I didn't like public speaking. I did not want to. I don't like being the center of attention. There's nothing in my DNA or, you know, my early years that tells you I was going to do a job like this one. And so I think it comes down to applying for, you know, pursuing and applying for and taking opportunities that scare you, you know, where you don't have that full list of, you know, experiences and capabilities, and you don't know if you can do it, because I think you have to be stretched and challenged. professionally, if you're going to grow, and to make those sort of progression jumps to more senior roles. And sometimes that's sort of not as hard as it sounds, because the company makes it easy for you. If you're on an accelerated talent development program, or you have amazing line managers, and I did have the latter, which is I think where I Bush came from. But ultimately, I think you can't rely on that. So it's down to us really to make it happen. Yeah, and don't be afraid to take control of your career. Yeah, make things happen for you. And then I think the other point, which is just about making it happen for you, is it is important to understand the ecosystem you operate in, and what other people do in it, and how they work, how they behave, what success looks like. And role models are really, really important. But there's only one you, and you tend to know yourself pretty well. So the other thing is you have to kind of find your path, and your work cadence, and your work-life balance, and how you turn up. And then you have to own it. Yeah, and be the best of you. And people I see who get on, that's who they are. And when it doesn't work in a company, because it's not always going to be a perfect fit, they find that the company or the ecosystem where it does work. And I think it's also quite important to understand, and to own that sort of that individualistic nature of it all.
Yeah, I love that. Decide how you're going to show up and then own it. I think that's a brilliant note to finish on. Sinead, thanks ever so much for the generosity with your time and all that you've shared with us on this conversation this afternoon. It's been an absolute delight, as it always is. Thank you very, very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very, very much, Louise. And I feel I have to say thank you so much for your leadership on the ELC, because if you'd asked me why has the ELC worked when so many different groups come together and they don't get to where we've got to, I would hand on heart say you.
Oh, that's very kind. I think maybe I did a bit of deciding how to turn up and then owned it. Maybe.
I think you absolutely did. And I don't think there are many individuals, you and Ruth have got a convening power. I don't think many other people could have got that bunch of CEOs and massively busy people to, even through a COVID crisis where we're all up to our eyes, our attendance rate at those meetings is still very high. It hasn't dropped through COVID, and I think that tells you something about what you co-created with that.
Well, it's a team effort, isn't it? Right. So it's a pleasurable piece of work to do. So and it's with fantastic purpose. So it's not really a chore. It's quite good fun, actually.
I agree.
That's lovely to see you, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Thanks very much, Sinead Lynch, Chair of Shell UK.